I'd like to say thank you everybody for showing up on a beautiful Sunday night when you could be having a barbecue, I suppose. But just to take us back into a little bit of history, it was exactly today, 527 years ago, at approximately 11 o'clock p.m., that the group of men started to board Christopher Columbus's ships. The actual date was August 2nd, 1492, at the end of Tisha B'Av, and the Jews had received the Alhambra decree, which was the edict to have everybody out of Spain or converted by July 31st, 1492. But the actual departure date was a day after Tisha B'Av night. So my first piece of mathematics starts to look at all the different types of coincidences there are about this concept about Christopher Columbus being Jewish, or at least the influence that Jews had on that voyage. So my opening argument is that history is written by those who are in power. And typically that has been Christians. So the history books never talk about what influence Jews have on perhaps the most famous voyage in all of adventure travel. And my good friend here, but Vinnick, asked me, how did I ever get into this? And I'm a bit of an adventurer myself, and I was traveling in Cuba. And whenever I go to a different country, I go and I try to drop in on the Jewish community. And I went to the oldest synagogue that I could in Old Havana, the Adath Israel, and I saw a flyer that said, "We know for sure that Louis de Torres, Christopher Columbus's first mate, was Jewish. And we strongly believe that Columbus was too." And I thought, well, this is where he landed. This is potentially the origins of history. Let's research it.
That's brilliant.
So what I have been doing is I have been accumulating all the different coincidences that I can and put them in a mathematical model to try to see if there's any solid logic to the theory and not just take a bunch of information off the internet, because you can find anything off the internet. And I've done this same class 2 years ago, but in the last year, significant new evidence has come up. And one of which is a video that Ezra shared with me, and the other is a piece of research on DNA that just came out, which to me I think was really mind-blowing. So every little bit of time, new research comes out. For example, last year we talked about the Jewish pirates of the Caribbean, and that's because a book had just come out, written by a guy who went to Jamaica and started to find iron crosses on cemetery stones with Hebrew below it. So there's continuously new information. So I want to update what we've talked about in the past, and then I want to go forward into the future and talk about the Jewish voyage from Spain to the New World and eventually into North America. So it's actually a trilogy story. This is like Breshit. We're going to do Breshit tonight. Last year we did, what's after Breshit? Genesis? What's after Breshit?
Exodus.
Huh? Exodus. And then there's?
Leviticus.
So there's three books of the Jewish journey from the old world to the new world. So we're going to talk about the first book right now. So the story goes, let's talk about it first of all. How did the Jews get to Spain and when did they get there? So the story goes that when they destroyed the first temple, the Jews went, or some of the Jews went to Babylon, and some headed west as far as they could to the Iberian Peninsula. And the Iberian Peninsula is as far as you can go on the Mediterranean west before you get into the open sea, which nobody ventured past. So theoretically, Jews have been there since the destruction of the first temple. Then they destroyed the second temple, and then the rest of them came. Of course, they were dispersed elsewhere. So Jews had been in the Iberian Peninsula for a good 1,500 years, and this was the most advanced Jewish society in the world. And Spain at that time was the most advanced and prosperous country in the world. And sure enough, there came this issue with the Jews, and they landed up, the Spanish Inquisition started to convert Jews to observe Catholicism, and they used various methods. The Spanish Inquisition used torture. And they didn't believe in blood, so they wouldn't cut you or shoot you, they would burn you, or they would put you on the rack, so they didn't want to draw blood. And that's where these methodologies of torture came from, the Spanish Inquisition. And so finally they converted forcibly or not most of the Jewish population. But there was a certain portion that was left. And the numbers vary, somewhere between 80,000 to 300,000 Jews that were left. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to avoid having these Jews corrupt the existing Jews that were already converted. So the Alhambra decree was considered the final solution to get rid of the Jews, get out of the country, and you had 4 months to leave. So I call this the first Holocaust. This is the Sephardic Holocaust, because when they left, they couldn't take their houses, and when they had to sell it, they were sold for very little money, and the non-Jews or the Catholics gave them nothing for it. They were not allowed to take gold and silver out of the country, and the only things they were allowed to take were promissory notes, or I forget the actual word, but notes of exchange, but they had high levels of interest, so basically they had to leave with almost nothing. And then when they were leaving, they were, they could only take certain merchandise. And then they would get robbed, and they would try to get on boats, and there was pirates. And so a lot of Jews were devastated by this final solution. And in the midst of all of this was Christopher Columbus. And so the interesting part about this whole series of coincidences, there was one piece where he writes to the king and queen, which is my Y variable, Y26. He says in his journal of the first voyage, Columbus writes, "So after having expelled the Jews from your dominion, your highnesses, in the same month of January, ordered me to proceed with sufficient armament to the said region." So he references the Jewish expulsion from Spain as one of the first things on his voyage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to briefly explain to you my math and what I'm trying to do. So in social sciences, we use two types of methods. One is a normal curve, where you try to determine from a sample the entire population. So if I ask 35 people a certain question, I can potentially extrapolate that to a larger population. The statistically significant number is 35. So I try to use very simple math and say, how many of these crazy coincidences can I collect to get close to 35 to start to make it seem like there's some statistical significance. That's one test. The other test is you take all of these different variables and you use what's called a coefficient, a beta coefficient, to see if that number relates to the hypothesis that you are testing. So I've accumulated about 28 of them, and some I think have much stronger coefficients than others. But I'm going to just briefly summarize the types of coincidences, and then I'm going to nail on the last two variables, which I think are the most statistically significant. So we're trying to determine whether Christopher Columbus was a secret Jew, and that's X. So first one, Christopher is a name that was often given to converts. So just because his name is Christopher, could be he was recently converted. Columbus's roots, his name always changes. It goes from Colombo to Colomb. So Colombo would be the Italian version because he was born in Genoa, Italy, and Colomb is a Spanish version. And there are many Jews with the name Colon, which the equivalent in Spanish would be Cohen. So his name could be Christopher Cohen. So the other thing is that if he was born in Genoa, Italy, but he wrote in Castilian Ladino, which is a form of Yiddish. And so he spoke much better Ladino than he did Italian. He was from a family of weavers. Basically, he's from the shmata business, an occupation frequented with Jews. He was highly educated in nautical mathematics and cartography, unusual for a son of a weaver to have such an education, unless he was of Jewish background. He had no university education. His first mate, Louis de Torres, was a Jew, and he had been recently baptized before the voyage. He spoke 5 languages, including Hebrew. The reason is they thought they could find, according to Simon Wiesenthal, they were looking for one of the 10 lost tribes. So they thought, by traveling the world and using Hebrew, they might be able to find one of the 10 lost tribes. Louis de Torres was actually the first person off the ships in Cuba, and he was the first discoverer of tobacco. And I'm going to reference another book where they say that he's the first Jew that took control of the tobacco industry. Another very strange coincidence is that the ships left after Tisha B'Av. So that in itself shows some type of knowledge of Tisha B'Av date, and that they start to load 11 o'clock tonight. So Tisha B'Av would end at sundown tonight, then they would load, and then tomorrow they sail. Very suspicious coincidence. You never see this in Christian history. Another thing is that no one talks about is the best cartographers, the map makers of the world, the literate people of the world, happen to have been Jews. A Jewish map was considered a very valuable prize that kings and queens would give to each other, and the best schools of cartography were in Majorca. Now, there's two things. There's one theory that the world, or the Christians, taught people that the world was flat, and that's why nobody sailed in that direction. I've been reading research that the Greeks knew by mathematics that they could always look at the horizon, they had an idea it was round. Maybe the world wasn't influenced by the fear of flatness. So the other issue is that part of the voyage, the problems with it was how far was it to get to land, and all they knew was Japan. So the issue was how good was their math in determining how long they would be at sea without food. And if you heard about the stories of mutiny on the Columbus's ships, it was because they were running out of food because they didn't know distances from Spain to possibly Japan, and what they did was they landed up bumping into the Americas. So the other thing that no one talks about is the nautical mathematics, the astronomy tools. The math was all of Jewish design. And Jews were in the sciences and the medicine, and these were the people who were the most sophisticated mathematicians at that time. And as an interesting side note, Jews were not allowed to practice law. That's why some of the best Jews were known for medicine. And I believe, was it Maimonides? Was he? He was a doctor. So the Jews were big in science and medicine because they weren't allowed to practice law, amongst other trades.
Excuse me. How about the Rambam Maimonides? At the time he was very, very famous. very well known, and he was allowed even to go to. He was a private doctor of the king.
There you go. So the Jews were known for medicine.
Oh.
That's, yeah. Another coincidence, there were no priests on the Columbus ships, even though they were trying to bring Christianity to the New World. Columbus used to write letters, and on his personal letters to his son Diego, he wrote, and you'll see that he would always sign on the top of it, H, which has been interpreted as Baruch Hashem. None of his other formal letters ever had that signature, but on those personal letters to his son Diego, he would have that. And if you take a look at that, you'll see it on top of there. 10% of Columbus' estate went to dowry for girls without sufficient money to get married, a typical Jewish tradition. He was considered a stateless person. He was from Italy, Spain, spent some time in Majorca, Lisbon, similar to Jews. Jews were always like this nomadic people. You never really knew where they were from. He didn't just go straight to the Spanish king and queen to get money. He went to the King of England, he went to the King of Portugal, and he was like trying to raise funds for this venture. So this comes the more number crunching side. The Spanish were in a long, protracted war with the Moors. I believe that was the Granada Wars, I think it was called. And they landed up spending most of the country's money fighting the Moors. So when he came to the king and queen, the funds were not available. And the people that actually put up the money were Marrano Jews. It was Luis de Santiago, Gabriel Sanchez, and Alonso de Cagaleria that put up the financing. So now we know we've got Jewish money, we've got Jewish maps, and we've got Jewish nautical instruments. So, as I mentioned, many people have written about this. So we have people such as Simon Wiesenthal, has written his book, Charles Garcia from CNN, Frank Katz, Jonathan Sarna, Rabbi Meir Karsling, and my newest piece of evidence is Henry Ford. This book is the most evil piece of anti-Semitism you're ever going to read, which I'm going to talk to you about later. But even in Henry Ford talks about this, and I'm going to read you his chapter to give me further evidence of what I'm talking about. Okay, so we know that Marranos hid their heritage, because if they didn't, they would be either killed or forced to convert or tortured. Columbus's wife was from the Fonterosa family, whose ancestors were Jewish. And of course, why risk sailing off the end of the earth unless you were being forced to be killed or converted? Why would you take that risk? So some people say, well, the map makers knew that the earth was round. Maybe they had information from the Vikings. Maybe they knew that there was something, So those are some of the variables, and what I do is I try to add up. So I've got about 29 variables, but now I want to talk to you about the two biggest variables that I think are mind-blowing. So recently in 2018, last year, they did DNA research in Latin America. And what they found is that they found that Jewish diseases were popping up throughout all of Latin America. Two particularly very Jewish diseases, such as Laron syndrome, which is a form of dwarfism, and a breast cancer, BRCA, were popping up in about 25% of the Jewish population in Latin America. So what it means, theoretically, is that you have 650 million Latin Americans, 25% of them may have Jewish DNA. Does that make them Jews? Halachically, I understand not. But it does argue the point that what Columbus was doing and what the Jews landed up doing was escaping and hiding their Jewish identities, which is only now being discovered through DNA research. So this gives this one variable 250 million potential reasons that Columbus could have been a secret Jew. Or at least he was tapped into the Jewish community and that he was doing something to help the Jews escape the Spanish Inquisition. The next piece of evidence I have is I received a video from Ezra about crypto Jews in El Paso, Texas, where we just had this big shooting. And this Rabbi Leon talks about how he came from New Jersey to take over a new synagogue called it's not Beth Zion, it's something Zion in El Paso. And when he gets there, he gets these calls from different people of Catholic persuasion that ask him questions. The priests over there referred him to this new rabbi. He was a new rabbi from New Jersey. And they said, every Friday night my grandmother would light candles and we'd have a big meal. And then when she died, my mother wouldn't do it anymore. So the priest told him, go speak to the rabbi. And the rabbi says, well, possibly your grandmother was of Jewish ancestry, but your mother was not. So, he finds out that there was a father linked to the grandmother and that grandmother was descendants of Spain. And then another guy comes into his, he talks about the cable guy. The cable guy walks into his house and, he talks to him and says, what are you, rabbi? I'm a Jewish. And the guy says, yeah, I'm Jewish too. And he pulls out a big Magen David. He says, where did you get that? And he said, my grandmother pulled out a box. We've got 10 grandchildren. And everybody was supposed to take one piece of Jewish paraphernalia so they would remember that they have some Jewish links. But it appears to be becoming more and more people are starting to come out of the closet, so to speak, in that northern part of Mexico. So what happened was when Jews were trying to get out of Spain, the Spanish Inquisition would look back 4 generations of bloodlines. Didn't want Jews corrupting the already converted Catholic people that were going into the New World. So that's why in Mexico City there is evidences of a lot of Jews being burned at the stake, and the lesser religious Jews went north. They were considered the worser quality period, and so they went up to the northern parts of Mexico, to New Mexico, and that's where these Jews are coming across the border and finding out about their Jewish roots. So this has been documented. So Dr. Peter Tarlow says there may be another 3 million potential around the El Paso, Texas area. So, and now I want to read you something from Henry Ford. This book was written in the 1920s, and it was a bunch of articles in the Dearborn Press, which became compiled into this terribly anti-Semitic book called The International Jew. And it talks about the Jewish history in the United States. The story of the Jews in America begins with Christopher Columbus. On August 2nd, 1492, more than 300,000 Jews were expelled from Spain, with which event Spain's prestige began its long decline. And on August 3rd, the next day, Columbus set sail for the West, taking a group of Jews with him. They were not, however, refugees, for the prophetic navigator's plans had aroused the sympathy of influential Jews for a long period previously. Columbus himself tells us that he consorted much with Jews. The first letter he wrote detailing his discoveries was to a Jew. Indeed, the eventful voyage itself, which added to men's knowledge and wealth, the other half of the earth, was made possible by the Jews. Henry Ford. The pleasant story that it was Queen Isabella's jewel which financed the voyage has disappeared under cool research. There were 3 Marranos, or secret Jews, who wielded great influence at the Spanish court. Louis de Santiago was an important merchant of Valencia and who was farmer of the royal taxes. His relative, Gabriel Sanchez, who was royal treasurer, and their friend, the royal chamberlain, Juan Carbarero. These worked incessantly on Queen Isabella's imagination, picturing to her the depletion of the royal treasury and the likelihood of Columbus discovering the fabulous gold of the Indies until the Queen was ready to offer her jewels in pawn for the funds. But Santiago craved permission to advance the money himself, which he did. 17,000 ducats in all, about 20,000, perhaps equal to $160,000 today. That is probable that the loan exceeded them. So then he goes on and he says, associated with Columbus in the voyage were at least 5 Jews: Louis de Torres, interpreter Marco the surgeon, Bernal the physician, Alonso de Lacalle, and Gabriel Sanchez. And here it is. The astronomical instruments and maps which the navigators used were of Jewish origin. So it goes on and on. So this kind of adds more credence to the theory that we don't know for sure that Columbus was Jewish. No one will ever know. But we do know that all the technology, the maps, the science behind it was Jewish. So that is so what am I trying to get from this is that I think we're going to reach a time right now where these crypto Jews are starting to pop up. And because they've been suppressed because of the fear of persecution from the Spanish Inquisition, and now there's a state of Israel, Jewish self-confidence is rising, and we may see many more crypto Jews come forward and try to get back into the Jewish world. So there's a saying where the Hashem says we will be as plentiful as the stars in the sky. Well, this is part of the potential of the Jews becoming more plentiful. We're at about 14 million right now, and it drops down and goes back up. And this type of information adds to the theory that the Jews were the great explorers of the day and not the Catholics of Christopher Columbus.